Hello, isn't this cute? I've rearranged my lounge for the purpose of this setup, purely because I've got so many books I am about to go through that I needed to have back support in my chair. So here we are in a kind of different cozy setup. I quite like it actually, but I won't be rearranging my lounge every time I need to film a video. But as I said, there's a lot of books to go through here. So this is my birthday video. On the day you're watching this, it is my 26th birthday, and I was thinking of ways to celebrate that with books. So this video is going to be 26 books that I am very glad to have read in my lifetime. So basically I have scoured my shelves for 26 books that have at some point either meant something to me, or I've really enjoyed, or have taught me something, or have been like a door opener for me for something else. All of these types of books I have thrown them next to me. 26 books, you think, oh, that's not many, and then you put them all next to you and you're like, no, that's actually quite a lot. I had to take a book stack photo for my Instagram and it was wobbly, so please go and show that some love, because it took me a while to get that without it falling over. So that's on my Instagram. I'm Booksnest on Instagram, or it's all linked down below. And those same 26 books are the books that I'm going to talk about now. I'm not going to give you like plot summaries as such for every single one of these. I might give you a vague overview similar to the way I do my super speedy wrap-ups, purely because if I gave you an in-depth description of all of these, we would be here for a long time. But what I will do is just say what it is about this book that means it's something special to me, or why I've put it on this list of books that I'm glad that I have read in my 26 years. I realise the older I get, the more doing X amount of books for X celebration of years on the planet is going to become more and more daunting. So in no particular order, literally just the order that I'm going to reach for these books. These might have been books you've heard me talk about before. They probably will be, most of them, but in various different types of videos, because these are all books that I have obviously really enjoyed. So the first book is The Bridges of Madison County by Robert James Waller. This is an absolutely tiny book. It is a fleeting story of an affair between a woman and a National Geographic photographer. It is a very quick romance, but it feels so passionate and so full of lust, and it just felt like a passion project, this novel, and I really enjoyed reading it. Funny for me to enjoy this one because I don't normally enjoy books where cheating is the main plot line, but if you read this, you kind of establish the fact that the woman that is married is in a really unhappy marriage, and not that that excuses it at all, but it's like, I don't like it when books glamorise cheating, and this book does do that, but it kind of works for the plot, and I didn't hate it quite as much for that reason. In fact, I loved it very much, and it made me cry, and it felt very passionate and very empowering. I think I've said passionate about 5 times now, but that is the main feel for this book. But also, I read this when I was at university. I read it in pretty much one evening, and I felt a lot of emotions within that time because it's quite an intense book to read in almost one sitting. So I definitely felt like I shed my soul into this book, and for that reason it has to make it onto my list of 26 books that I'm very glad to have read. Let's just get this next one out of the way because we know it's coming. It's The Shadow of the Wind by Carla Shura-Zafon. This is my favourite book. I recently reread it with my patrons, and it was a really interesting experience to be able to annotate this and think about it in a bit more of a critical way. When I very first read this, I was again at university, and I think for me this was just unlike anything I had ever read before, and it very much opened the door to the genre for me, and I think that's why it is so high up in my regard, because it introduced me to books about books. It introduced me to what I like to think of as like clever mystery, historically kind of combination of all of these things. This is its heart a historical fiction that has a mystery entwined into it, and that kind of book for me is something that I find fascinating. I love learning things and being able to figure things out at the same time as having history woven into the story and finding out all these new and interesting things, and it just makes my brain very active and happy. So I love this book. We know I love this book. I will continue to recommend this book for all of my days. It's fantastic, and it's my favourite book of all time, so how could it not be in my 26 books that I'm very proud to have read? From historical book about books with a mystery in it to historical book about a band with an interview in it, because this whole book feels like one big interview, and this is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is told in such an interesting format because it does very much feel like you are reading a magazine interview and you think this is a real band. Like you'll know it's fictional, but you're still gonna go and Google them, because the way that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes this is just so clever, because it's written as an interview and it's to create this biography of this band and their life and their experience together. it just feels like you are actually reading about real people that are sharing their real experiences. It follows the six as a band separately to Daisy Jones, and then the two kind of come together, and it's about their journey. I read this sitting on the side of a pool in Cyprus, very lovely hot day, read it in a day, absolutely fell in love with it, and I will never forget the atmosphere of this book. It just, if you like bands like Fleetwood Mac, you're gonna like this book because it just feels like you're reading about somebody real, and I love that. I think that is the trait of an excellent piece of fiction. It would be very wrong of me not to include a work of Tolkien on this list, so I'm putting The Hobbit in because this is the book that opened the door for me for Tolkien. This is obviously the first one I read and have then subsequently gone on to read all of the Lord of the Rings books as well. This one is also written as a children's book, which means it's slightly less daunting than the Lord of the Rings books, so this was definitely a good place to start. Also, there is a fantastic audiobook narrated by Andy Serkis, who's the actor that plays Gollum in the films. And I just loved reading this so much. It's always been a world I have adored jumping into. The Lord of the Rings films are fantastic. And do you know what? I like the Hobbit films, especially the extended ones. I like them. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but it is my opinion. And I just adored falling into this world in fiction as well. And honestly, it took me quite a while to read these books. I only read them last year. So for being such a fan of the films since I was about, well, whenever the films came out, 2001 was it? So since I was about 6 or 7, I just loved those films. I would play Lord of the Rings with these two boys that I was friends with when I was a kid, and I would run around being Legolas. It was a great time. So to have only just read the books, I think it took me longer than it should have, but I'm glad that I have now read them. So this represents all of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings books because, yes. Then we have got The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep by H.G. Parry. This is a favourite book of mine. I read this for the first time at the start of last year. It's another book about books, but it is a book about books that we know, like actual fiction that we've heard of, which I love. That is my favourite type of book about books because it feels so relatable when a character is literally jumping out of a page of a book that you've read. So this is about characters that come to life, which is just such a fun concept. It's set in New Zealand as well, which is not really somewhere I've read many books set in, so I genuinely enjoyed this for so many reasons. I've seen a couple of people say they've read this and enjoyed it because I've recommended it, which makes me incredibly happy because I personally don't think this gets enough hype, but I absolutely loved it. And if you want a book about books and if you enjoy reading books about things that you have read yourself, this is definitely one to give a go, and I just think the atmosphere created is fantastic and it couldn't not appear on this list. Next up is a new book that I have read recently that isn't even out yet, so it's done quite well to make it onto this list. This is Midnight in Everwood by M.A. Kuznia. This is a Nutcracker retelling that is very winter vibes, so if you are going to be pre-ordering this one for October, you just spot on with the seasons because as soon as it hits November, December time, oh my god, I want to reread this by that point. Like, you can see that it's wintry already because of the front cover here. Isn't this the most stunning arc ever? It's absolutely beautiful. But as I said, it's a Nutcracker retelling. It's very magical. And I read this book over the Christmas break last year, so I feel like I associate it with spending time with my family, having a break from work, being able to enjoy the festivities, and just having that relaxing release. And I really enjoyed reading this book over that holiday time. So for me, it's the memory of reading this and how excited I was to read it as well, because I was so anticipating this and I felt so honoured to be sent this beautiful arc that I was just so excited to read it, and it just completely lived up to all expectations. So do pre-order this one, Midnight in Everwood. Then we have got This Winter by Alice Osman. Now I've put this one in here because I think I read this one before I read Nick and Charlie, but basically I was doing a readathon at some point last year, at the end of last year, and I needed a couple of quick wins, so I read the 2 Alice Osman novellas. Now I had at this point read the first Heartstopper book and I had liked it, but I wasn't completely blown away. I hadn't bought any of the other ones, and I think book 2 and 3 were out by that point, but book 4 was not. So I kind of was meh, I was okay about it, and then I read these 2 novellas and my opinion completely changed and I completely fell in love with Nick and Charlie. Wasn't really sure why I hadn't a couple of years ago when I read the first book, and immediately needed to read all of the books. So this very much opened up my eyes to be able to enjoy the Heartstopper series, which is now probably one of my favourite series, and honestly I don't know if I would have dived back into it as deeply if I hadn't have just casually picked up these novellas. I think I even bought this novella and read it pretty quickly after, because I bought it for the readathon to be like a quick book to be able to get through. So I'm very glad I did, because honestly, Nick and Charlie are just such fantastic characters. Alice Osman's work is amazing. Heartstopper is truly fantastic. You guys know how much I love her writing, so I just really am glad that I picked this up, because I don't know how much I would have enjoyed the Heartstopper books without doing this first. I don't know if I would have continued with the series, which would have been just not right. Next up is a book that I have only ever seen myself having read of people I know. I've never seen this one mentioned on BookTube, so I think this one definitely deserves more love. However, I can see it would be a bit daunting. This is The Family Tree by Sherry S. Tepper. This is quite an old book, and I don't actually think it's in print anymore, so if you do like the sound of it, you will have to search the secondhand bookshops or the secondhand websites. But I just can't ever forget this book and how the plot in this book became mind-blowing. We are following a woman in like the present day that this book was written, who is having a bit of an issue with the fact that there is a crap ton of trees growing around her house, and like it's becoming completely overgrown, and this is becoming quite a problem. And then we also follow a group of people who are kind of, you get the idea that they're in another realm, another world slash universe, and they're a bit more Game of Thronesy. There's a bit of a magic element about them. You get that impression that we've got these two different, we've got a fantasy world and then we've got our world. Except in our world some very strange things are happening, and it is about those two stories coming together. And that is all I'm going to say, because there is massive things that happen in this book that will blow your mind. I will say though, if you do ever choose to pick this up, which not very many people do, but if you do think that sounds interesting, because it does also talk about the environment and things like that, it's got some really important topics in it too. If you do think this sounds interesting, the first 200 pages I will say are quite slow, but when you have this revelation moment in the middle, your whole outlook on the book will change, and you will completely just read it in a very different way. It's so good. It's so good. She also has another really great book called Beauty as well. Both of her books are fantastic there. I don't know if she's got any more than that. She probably does. I'm gonna have a look at that. But fantastic writer. This book is on my list because I will never ever forget that middle moment of this book where I was like, oh my god, I kind of want to reread this. In fact, maybe this would be a book I would put into a Patreon book club or something like that, although I don't think there's any way I'm going to write in this edition, because this is my mum's edition, and oh, is it? I think my mum actually bought me another edition because she couldn't find hers to give me, and then found hers at a later date, so maybe we do have two lying about the place, but so good. Next up we have got one from my childhood, and this is Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I adore the nonsensical nature of this book. It just feels like anything can happen. It's like that moment when you're dreaming and you realise you're dreaming, and you can just make everything around you just kind of work and do whatever you want, and I love that we get that in this book. It's just so brilliant. I feel like I don't need to tell you what Alice in Wonderland is about, but this is one from my childhood. This is not the edition I read from my childhood, but this is one from my childhood that has always stuck with me and has probably shaped my want for the weird when I read my books, and how I want something that does feel very much like a dream and feels like anything can happen. And I love those kind of magic systems the best, so I think this definitely set the bar for me. And also this edition is absolutely stunning too. I know people are probably going to ask which edition this is. This is the Penguin Classics. I think, is it called leatherbound or clothbound? This is leatherbound, isn't it? This is one that I bought myself because I'm trying to slowly grow my collection. I have the Brothers Grimm as well in this one that I got as a graduation present, and I kind of get myself one every few years when I feel like I'm desperately wanting a new edition in these, because I think I might get Peter Pan next. Is that one in this edition? Peter Pan is another one that I was going to put on this list but didn't. Another one from my childhood that made me feel like anything could happen type of thing. Anyway, these editions are stunning. I want more of them. But this is Alice in Wonderland. Another one I read over the Christmas break last year, so I feel like very similar to Midnight in Everwood. I associate it with that time for me, and that is One by One by Ruth Ware. This has set the bar for thrillers. This is such a good isolated murder mystery thriller. People are stuck in a cabin, someone's been killed. Who's done it? We don't know. Who's going to be next? Who knows? I just think this is absolutely fantastic. I devoured this within a day or two. Such a good thriller, completely sets the bar, opened my eyes to Ruth Ware as a writer. I've also read The Turn of the Key by her, which is fantastic, and I've got more books by her on my wish list. But generally, Loved it very, very much. The reason it's on this list is one, because it just completely set the bar for thrillers, as I've said 3 times now, and 2, because of that period of time when I read it, I just associate it with being home for Christmas and having that cozy family environment around me. Then we've got Silvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic, which I think is such a fantastic Gothic horror. I read this one last Halloween, and again, one of the reasons it's on this list is because of the time I associate reading it. I just moved into my flat. It was my first autumn here, obviously, as I just moved into my flat, but the leaves were turning, it was a creepy season, entering into Halloween, and it just felt like the perfect time to be reading this, and I think I totally fell into the atmosphere of this book. It's got a creepy haunted house, it's got some very weird family members that are keeping the main character's cousin within this very weird situation that they've got going on, and it's all about her trying to figure it out and free her cousin from this strange environment she's got herself trapped in, and I just loved it so, so much. The atmosphere is spot on for the October season, so if you have got this one and it's on your TBR, I would really, really advise reading it around that time of year because it just works so well, and I think I will always remember the way this book made me feel. I think most of the books that are on this list are because of that atmosphere and the way they made me feel and the way I can still remember that feeling. So yeah, just so good. Another typical guessable one to put on this list is Fallen Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. This is a series I am slowly making my way through. I have got 2 books left. It's a 6-book series. I started this last year and I completely fell into it. It is like Game of Thrones, but a lot less daunting. I think there is so much happening, there is so much brutality, and like the main characters, you just can't trust who's actually going to be good, who's going to be bad, who's going to live, who's going to die. There's like so many main characters that we follow as well, like so many, which is why I think again it's that Game of Thrones way about it. You've got multiple different storylines that you go and follow. You just can't trust anybody, you can't trust the author. She just kills people, okay? Like lots of people. So it's a brutal, brilliant book, and I think as far as high fantasies go, this is such a good series. If you want to get into one and you generally tend to be a bit daunted by these kind of books, this is one that is a lot easier to swallow. Very addictive. I guarantee these books will take me about 3 days to get through because I just can't put them down. Okay, I think there's like 2 or 3 more really predictable options, so we'll just get through another one of those, and that is House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas. I always feel like I need to apologise when I put this book in videos, but actually I don't think I've talked about it for a while, but given that this is 26 books I'm very glad that I've read, I am glad I've read this one, because for me this was a really fun, exciting fantasy. There was so much going on that I just could not put the book down. There was a lot of emotions going on in this book too, and a lot of epic emotions, which I really enjoy. If you listen to some kind of epic soundtrack while you're reading this, I think it would just amplify everything. So good. But as I've said before, I did read this one just before COVID struck. So I think I associate this with, I started it when my mum and I were at a spa day for her birthday. So I started it then, and I think I associate it with that lovely relaxing time, but also with that kind of moment of calm before everything happened. So whilst I didn't know at that time what was going to happen, reading this and thinking back on reading this now is that kind of moment of so I'll always remember it for that, and also the really lovely spa day that we had, but generally just such an exciting book. Next up is a book that I have added onto this list for a very, very specific reason, and that is Hoot by Carl Hyson. Look how old this one is, because it's got the little 3 for 2 sticker on it with the old branding of Waterstones. So I read this book when I was 11. And the reason this book is on this list is because when I was 11 and I was going into secondary school, so I was going into year 7, and we had to create a postcard with a book we'd read over the summer, send it to the librarian, and we would get entered into this competition to win. So I created this book cover as a postcard, which looking at it now was pretty much the easiest book cover I could have possibly picked to recreate. And then I wrote a review on the back of that postcard for the book. So this book follows a young boy who has to move to Florida. He's really not very happy about it, and then he ends up making friends with another boy, and they have this relationship where he discovers that actually maybe it wasn't as boring as he expected down in Florida, in Florida. I forget where he's come from. It's not as boring as he expected in Florida. So that plotline isn't really the reason this book is on this list. This book is on this list because of creating that postcard, and I still remember that optimism before I was going into secondary school, where I was so excited about moving up a school year and going into this new school, and I was going to learn loads of stuff and I was going to do so many more subjects. And creating this postcard was like the start of being really productive and being ready for that with my stationery and my pencil cases. I was like really into stationery. I still am, but still. So I really associate this time with that book. And I also managed to win that competition, and I still remember them calling out my name, and I had to go up in front of the school on my first day of year 7 and get an award. It probably really set the bar for the boffin bullying that I got. I don't know if people still use the word boffin, but I always called a boffin because I was clever. But sod it, I won a competition for writing a book review, and look where I am now. I feel like that's another reason why I love the memory of this book and why I still have a copy of it with me in my flat, because it totally is that haha, because yes, I was clever at school, and yes, that made me get bullied, and I won a competition for writing a book review, and now that is what I do as part of my living. Like, it's a second job for me, all of my book content. So who's laughing now? Next up we have got The Little Paris Bookshop by Nina George, which is another book about books, and is on this list for the way it made me feel and the lovely tone and the lovely way the characters treated each other and just were in this book. Everyone was friends with everyone, everyone really wanted to help, and the main character of this book basically has a floating bookshop on a barge that he uses to help people with their problems. So they'll come in and he will recommend them a book based on what he thinks they need at that point in their life. And he ends up going on a much wider journey in this book to discover something he thinks he needs in his life. And I just love the beauty in this book. I love the journey that the characters go on, and I love the fact that his barge of books is there to help people find what they really need and maybe didn't necessarily know they need, because I think that's the beauty of books, is sometimes they can really, really help you when you didn't even know that they were going to do that, or you didn't know you needed it. And this book just summarises that so beautifully. Of course, I have to put The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang on this list. I love this book so much. This is one of my favourite books. It does academy school setting incredibly well. We see a very intense journey in this book of Rin and her years at this academy where she's training to be a soldier for the country to fight within these wars that seem to be keeping occurring, and this war that is coming their way. And she also discovers she has shamanic abilities within this, and oh my god, so many things to love. I love the fact that we go through this school system in this whole book, and it's not like the whole series is that. It makes it feel incredibly compelling, and also means that every book in the series is completely different from the last one, which means you get something very special in each book. But also, we have shamanic abilities, and we have a really interesting magic system. I've read this book twice now, and the imagery just is so clear in my mind that I would very much happily read it a third time and just immerse myself in it all over again. So loved this book so much. Definitely a favourite, definitely a clear set winner to go on my list of 26 books that are absolutely amazing. Then we have got a rather strange book, but it is Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins. This follows many different characters on a journey, all surrounding this perfume bottle. It's very, very strange. Tom Robbins writes very strange books, but I really enjoyed this. And the reason it's on this list is because this is a book my mum always told me about, and she told me how good it was and how much she enjoyed it. So I felt very excited to read this, and she bought me a copy a couple of years back, in fact many, many years back for my birthday. And I really enjoyed it because, again, it's similar to Alice in Wonderland with that nonsensical weirdness to it. This definitely ticked those boxes. I can't really tell you what the plot is about because the plot is just everywhere, but as I said, at the heart of it is this perfume bottle and these people that are affected by this perfume bottle, and what this perfume bottle means, and what the effects of this perfume bottle are having on the world. So it's, I mean, you can probably get that it's going to be kind of strange from the fact that it's all centred around a perfume bottle, but just, I loved it. If you are a fan at all of Pan and that kind of mythology, that does feature in here as well, as you can probably guess from the cover. But such a strange book, such a good one though. This is such a long video, but I'm having a great time, so I hope you guys are too. Next up, we have got the book that opened the door for Victoria Schwab for me, A Darker Shade of Magic. This is the first in the trilogy. I have also absolutely loved so many other books by Victoria Schwab as well. I think my favourite is her Villains series, Vicious and Vengeful. So good, because we have, like, if you're a fan of X-Men, those books. Yes, we've got extraordinary abilities and it's just so good. But this series, I initially picked this up because it reminded me of a book I read as a kid called London, which is about an alternate reality London, I think, if I've remembered that correctly. So I picked this book up because of that reason, and it just didn't disappoint me. It's just so good, and I will always hold Victoria Schwab in such high esteem. I met her once at a signing in Bristol, and it was such a small signing that she had a chance to chat to people individually for quite a while, and I will always remember that she took the time to do that and how special that was. And this series follows this adventure over 3 books, and I think we're getting more within this world, which is so exciting. And we're also getting a film. Is it a film or a TV show? Generally, many exciting things happening. So this book series follows Lila, and it follows Kel and this magical 3 different versions of London, except they're not all magical, and the kind of clashes between those 3 worlds, and what people know, and the magic, and what people are discovering about themselves. And it's just so good, so good. It's been a long time since I've read this series, and I kind of feel like I need to reread it because I can still remember quite a lot from it, but I think that the main parts of it are slipping from my brain a little bit. But what I do remember about this book, and the reason it's in this list, is because this opened my eyes to Victoria Schwab's writing and how fantastic it is. And I have a whole shelf dedicated to her, and I think she's fantastic, and she is by far one of my favourite authors. Then we have got The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, another book by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I think this is the only book where I've duplicated the author in this list, but I had to because this is so good. I think I actually listened to this as an audiobook, and wow, best audiobook I've ever listened to. So brilliant. It is narrating the story of Evelyn Hugo as she goes through her life. She is a Hollywood star, and we see her life as she is being interviewed about it and telling this woman who is writing this story, who she's requested this woman write her story, and we find out more and more about her and about her loves and about who she really loved. And it's just such a phenomenal book. I don't ever know if anything will top this book for books like this, books of this genre. I mean, Taylor Jenkins Reid writes such brilliant stories, and this one again was the first of her books that I read and opened the door to me reading more by her as well, and she's just so brilliant. Next up is a non-fiction that I actually dive in and out of, so I won't say that I've read this, probably not in its entirety, but I dip in and out of chapters as and when they're relevant. But this is Vagina, a Re-Education by Lynn Enright. This is such an interesting book to learn more about vaginas and about vulvas and about bodies. This is just so valuable in terms of what it teaches and how open and honest it is. There's diagrams, there's descriptions, there's stuff in here that you were probably never taught at school because it just wasn't covered. And I think this is a really interesting book for anyone to read. So I have to put this in here because for me this has certainly shaped a lot of my knowledge and a lot of my confidence with talking about things like this. So at the age of 26, I think I am still definitely learning about my own body, and this is certainly a book that has helped me learn a lot more in recent years. So if you're looking to do the same, I would definitely recommend this, but it had to go in my list of 26 books that have had an impact on me or that I'm glad I've read, because I have learned a lot from this book, and I will constantly dip in and out of it as depending on what I want to learn at that specific time. The next book is Caraval by Stephanie Garber, specifically this edition of Caraval because this is the arc that I was very lucky to be able to get from my job at the time, which was Waterstones. I was a bookseller, and I read this at a very crap time. I had just been dumped from my very long relationship. I had just moved away from my town that I'd grown up in. I had left university. I had quit a job that had absolutely sucked the soul out of me. So much stuff had happened that I was just in such a crap place, and the fantasticness of this magic system pulled me out of it and distracted me and gave me somewhere to be that felt like I belonged somewhere. And this book, I will forever be grateful for Stephanie Garber for creating this, because I just can never get over what this book did for me. And if you ever feel lost and you want to feel at home somewhere, these are just amazing. Caraval as a world is nonsensically brilliant. Again, the magic system is so expansive. Caraval is essentially a big game that these 2 sisters go to, and you can get involved in it or you can watch, and it's about their journey in this first book, and the second 2 are fantastic. And then Once Upon a Broken Heart, which is a spin-off book from this series, is also fantastic. I won't ever forget what this book did for me, and when I thought about writing this list down and the 26 books, this is the first one that came to my mind to create this video. So it's just so important to me. Then we have When God Was a Rabbit by Sarah Winman. This is a book I have read a couple of times. This is a very worn copy. This is really a book about life. It's a book about all stages of life, about growing up, about those relationships you have, about family and friendships and love. I can't really give you a synopsis of this plot because it generally is very much a book about those experiences that you have. And I just remember every time I've read this, I've felt real connection to it, and I felt like what it's doing as a book is so important that I couldn't not include it in this list. Every time I see it on my shelves, I smile and think about the lovely messages in this book, and just generally it's a really beautiful story, so it had to go on this list. So this is When God Was a Rabbit by Sarah Winman. Then we have Tanglewreck by Jeanette Winterson. This is another book that I read as a child that has always been one I've kept hold of. This is about time going wrong and two people who have to basically go and solve what's happening and find out what's going on and find this timekeeper to try and right all of these wrongs. I just remember loving this one so wholeheartedly, and I think as well this cover gives off serious steampunk vibes, and for me when I was a child I was reading a lot of books like that, and just I've always kept hold of this one because of how exciting an adventure it was. And again, when I first picked up Victoria Shroud books, it's because they remind me of books I read as a child, because they felt like real adventure stories. And I think when you read books as a child, you are going in for that adventure, and these books, and this book specifically, felt like it had such an exciting adventure behind it that I absolutely adored it. You can tell I've been filming for a while because my camera just told me it was too hot and it shut down, so I don't know where it cut me off, but we'll just dive into the next book I was talking about. So this next book is again another one that I haven't actually completely finished yet because it's another non-fiction, and I do dive in and out of it as and when I fancy picking it up. And that is The Woman's History of the World by Rosalind Miles. I thought this one was really important to put in this list because whilst I haven't finished it, the amount that this has taught me about the history of the world and about women's involvement in it that I just didn't have a clue on, and how much of that has been erased, and like history seems to have started at a certain point when women just didn't have the role that they actually did have. This has taught me so much, and for that reason it's definitely in this list. This one sits on my bedside table, and whenever I don't really fancy picking up my current read, I will pick this one up instead, which does mean I am reading it rather slowly. I literally just read a couple of pages at a time, but that's because it gives you so much information that I think I want time to digest it. But honestly, what this has taught me is just amazing, and there was so much in this that I didn't know that I feel like so many people deserve to know. So honestly, would highly recommend this book if you want to learn more about the women's history of the world and things you didn't actually know that seem to have just been forgotten about to be mentioned in the history books. Next up, I have got Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is one I've read really recently, and this really stuck with me. It's such an important story. It follows a woman who is in the 1980s and gets transported back to the 1800s through means that she does not understand, and she is confused at that point as a slave and treated as such. I think this is such an important book to read for the messages, but also just as far as this story goes, I just felt so gripped and so compelled to find out what was happening that I just couldn't put it down. And I think I'd never read anything quite like this before, I don't think. It's got the time travel element in it, but it doesn't feel like it's a sci-fi. I think technically it is written down as a sci-fi, but it's massively historical fiction as well, because we are seeing most of the perspective of this book from the 1800s, and we're learning about how our main character is seeing life differently and how she's kind of knows about all these things that have happened, and yet in the 1800s she's obviously experiencing them, versus in the 1980s when she's learning about them and seeing them as a part of history. And this is such an interesting book for those perspectives that it gives and that different way of looking at it, because again we're seeing the main character know her modern day. I think this was written at the time that it was set, so know her modern day of the book being written, and then seeing the contrast from the 1800s and those different experiences and seeing it from this perspective of her experiences is something that I think is really invaluable, and it's just made this book definitely go on this list. And finally, the last book on this list is The Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. This is the first in the trilogy of the His Dark Materials world, and I really enjoyed this book, and this is a book that I only read as an adult. Actually, I hadn't read this as a kid. I think I might have tried to read it as a kid, but never fully got into it. So I read this as an adult for the first time, but also one of the reasons that this is on my list is because I basically read these quite intensely over the space of a week and absolutely loved them, talked about it a lot online, and I must have got noticed by the right person, because off the back of really loving this series, I was invited to be able to go to the premiere for the BBC show in London What? And I think to this day that is the most amazing thing I have done. To be invited to that, and my mum and I went and we saw the first episode early, and we were just kind of in this room with loads of very important people that were in the show or that had made the show or that had written the book. Philip Pullman was there too. I think one of the Spice Girls was there. It was a very strangely surreal experience, and I will always think, huh? That happened? What? But I am so glad that I discovered these books because I wholeheartedly adore them, and the fact that I was able to have that experience off the back of loving a piece of fiction so much was very surreal and very amazing. So those are my 26 books. I always do this and then worry that that wasn't quite 26, but I'm pretty sure that was 26 books. I've counted them many times. Those are my 26 books that had an impact on me or that I am glad I have read in my lifetime. I can't really decide on what direction this video is taking, but I think it's 26 books that I'm glad I've read in my lifetime for whatever reason, for opportunities, for the way they've taught me about fiction, for the way they've taught me about history, for the way they've made me feel, for the atmosphere. So many different reasons I'm very grateful for reading these books, but generally these are all books I've absolutely loved, and I hope that I've offered some recommendations. I've given you some books that I've definitely talked about before, and I've shown you some books that I've probably not ever talked about before or have very rarely talked about, so hopefully it was a good mix. I hope this was a fun birthday video. I think it's probably going to be quite a long one, judging by how long I've been filming for, but I hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you did, please do give this video a thumbs up. Comment down below some of the books that you think you're really pleased you've read within your X amount of years. You can subscribe to see more of my face on your feed, and if you would like to get any more content from me and like to support in any way, there is a Patreon link down below where I do extra content like dedicated reading vlogs, podcasts, live shows, lots of fun things. It's a great place to be. I absolutely love it. And that is all linked down below. But I hope you enjoyed this new setup as well. Let me know what you think. I'm not necessarily going to do it every time because yeah, I have moved around my living room, but that's the video. I'm going to end it here. Thank you so much for watching. Keep smiling and stay positive.